All right. Thanks so everyone so much for having me. My name is Frank Nagle. I should point out, as of yesterday, I'm also at the Linux Foundation. But this is joint work with two postdocs in my lab, Manuel, who's going to UC Irvine, Sam Boycell, and then also you'll see in a minute, most of my work is on open source, and so the data is public. But this one we were looking at some things behind the scenes as well. So we worked with Cedia and Kevin from Microsoft and GitHub as well. What is this paper about? You know, the title is Gen AI and the Nature of Work. There's been a lot of great papers out there about generative AI and productivity and how we increase, you know, whatever it is we're trying to do faster, better, et cetera, et cetera. What we're trying to think about here is whether or not it changes the way that people work and the balance of different tasks that they have when they're doing work. So a little more in the micro realm as opposed to the papers we just saw. And I'll point out this is what DALL-E thinks that Gen AI and the nature of work is. I love this picture because, you know, this is the only person with an actual computer. The rest just have keyboards. This person's sitting inside the desk. So, you know, AI is not quite there yet, but it's getting there, right? So what do we do in this paper? We try to think about how AI adoption can change the nature of work, and we look at the weekly activity of about, I think it's 80,000 developers over the course of 2 years. And we have this nice natural experiment that I'll get into where we can have this discontinuity where GitHub's Copilot, some of you may have used it, it's a coding Gen AI, and this experiment sort of predates ChatGPT, so it's reasonably clean. But some people get it for free and some don't. And so we have this nice discontinuity to look at what happens with the people that get access to Gen AI for free. So what do we find? We find that the balance of work that people do shifts. It does indeed shift, and they start doing more of what we're going to call core work, and I'll talk about what that is in a minute, and they do much less project management. And then we see the mechanisms behind this that are driving it is that people are doing way more by themselves and way less with other people, which is interesting in itself, especially in a context like open source, where we have this kind of distributed community type of work that happens in general. We also see that people start exploring and working on new things much more than the old things, which we consider exploitation. And this isn't just something that happens at the beginning. This is pretty consistent over a two-year period. And then lastly, this is fairly consistent with many other papers, but the impact is stronger for those that have less experience or less ability, depending on how we think about that as well. So our hope here is to contribute, and there's been a million more papers thinking about this since 2024, which is only a few months ago. But really, again, trying to think about how do we go beyond just productivity effects into some of the things that the other papers were talking about more at the macro level, and think about the way that work itself actually shifts. And so we try to look at this as well in this context of open source. Those of you that know my research, everything's about open source. This paper, open source, is sort of lurking in the background. But one nice thing about this is also we have this potential tool that can help us with private provision of public goods, which is something we talk about a lot in economics as well. And then again, this kind of long-term, we argue it's causal evidence in this real-world scenario rather than some other good work that has been more lab experiment type of situations. So what do we mean when we think about this kind of work dichotomy or different types of work? So you can imagine, and yes, DALL-E drew this too. But you can imagine we're academics here. So you have your core work, which is research or teaching, and then you have your other work, administrative work, or as you climb the ranks, more and more administrative work and less core work. And so we're thinking about that in the context of software developers, where their core work is going to be coding, and then we have all this type of project management work that happens around that to make everything work. And in a survey we ran of developers a few years ago, we found that many of them reported that they were doing way less of this than they wanted to and way more of this than they wanted to. And so, again, one of the thoughts here is, can Gen AI help rebalance and get people working in the way that they want to? I can't say that this will, get rid of all your committee assignments and everything like that, so you can do more core work, but at least in this context, that's what we're going to see. So we build on some of the existing literature to generate a few hypotheses that at least for core work, push in this direction. The whole point of this Gen AI tool is to drop the cost of core work. And when costs drop, people tend to do more of things. But when we think about project management, it's a little more actually relevant to the last talk about thinking about whether these are complements or substitutes. So is project management a complement or a substitute for the kind of core work? Does it make us better or worse? And as well here, I'll point out that in this context, there's a few other types of work tasks. So it's not necessarily the case that if this goes up, this has to go down mechanically. That's not exactly how it's going to look in the empirics. Then second, again, when thinking about this notion of autonomous versus collaborative work, we started calling this independent work because this is about you doing work by yourself, not necessarily the machines doing the work. But often it's been shown that tech sort of streamlines a whole lot of these communication and decision making, and then ends up reducing collaboration and the overhead from that. And so people can work more in the silos and never have to talk to anybody, which is, these are software developers, so that's what they want to do anyways. And then third, thinking about this balance of exploration and exploitation, we're trying to think about how when the costs of experimentation decrease, people are going to do more of that, right? And we generally would see this as a good thing because this is how we get innovation, new ideas, all those types of things. And other work in kind of the IT space has shown similar things too. And so the argument here is going to be that Gen AI is going to drop the cost of experimentation enough that people are going to do more of that experimentation. And then finally, again, this is consistent with some of the older literature, but certainly consistent with a bunch of the literature in Gen AI. You heard about the MIT paper recently, which found the opposite of this. Then, anyways, that's a conversation. That's a conversation for other drinks. But it was an interesting paper until it wasn't. But anyways, our predictions and consistent with lots of others is that this is going to have a bigger impact for people that are lower ability because there's just more room for them to grow, right? More room for them to change and have their work impacted by AI. So the tension here, the challenges in testing the hypothesis are going to be we need to find a place where we can see these kind of intricate, minute work patterns and also see an AI tool introduced in some sort of quasi-exogenous way. And like all things in life, we find the answer in open source. And thinking about the introduction of this GitHub Copilot, and I'll tell you how the program was rolled out, but for us as the researchers, it was in a fairly exogenous way. So very briefly, if you're not familiar with open source, I'm just going to give you kind of the open source process in a nutshell. Usually the way it works is that somebody writes a piece of code, they think it's pretty neat, and they're going to open that code to the world, right? And say, hey, world, this is my piece of code. They put it in something called a repository, which is essentially just a project folder, and they become the maintainer of that project, so sort of the manager of that project. That person can edit, add or edit code to that project directly. Other people, and this is where the whole big kind of novelty to open source and to a lot of things happens, is that other people can contribute in a few different ways. First of all, if you see a bug in the code or you want them to add a new feature, you can say, hey, can you add that new feature? And by reporting this thing called issues, or you can actually suggest the code itself, right? And say, here's a piece of code, it adds a new feature, please add this into your project, right? So this is not like Wikipedia where you can add things directly, unless if you're not a maintainer, then you sort of have to get the approval of the maintainer in advance to be able to change the public code base. And then lastly, maintainers can choose to address these issues or not, and accept or merge these pull requests, these code suggestions or not. So it ends up being on the maintainers to decide if they're going to do anything with the external suggestions. And then lastly, the maintainers can also add other maintainers, right? So it's not always just the kind of person that started it. We can add other people to help us out. All right, so GitHub, and you're familiar with it, it's where open source essentially lives for many years at this point. But what's useful for our case is that they have this great granular data on coding activities, on project management activities, and sort of other activities, things that don't fall neatly into either of these two buckets. So that's what I meant by these aren't necessarily mutually exclusive. We sort of have other things that people are doing that aren't directly in those two buckets. And then the AI that shows up now, we've all heard of Microsoft's Copilot. It started at GitHub, and it was built on technology on GPT-3 from OpenAI. Again, it predates ChatGPT, but is basically built on the same model. And it's basically next word prediction, but for coding, right? So the way this works, if you want to write a Python script that's going to send a tweet with an image attached to it, all you have to do is write the image, the function header, and then Copilot does the rest. So the highlighted stuff is what Copilot wrote. And studies have shown that these are pretty usually, I think it's 60 to 70% of the time, developers accept these suggestions. And as you can imagine, this is going to have big productivity implications because you only have to write half a line of code as opposed to writing all 7 lines of code here, right? So it drastically speeds things up. And so when we think about Copilot and the timeline of its rollout, there was a technical preview for a year. We throw out everybody that had this kind of early technical access, and so we only look at people that didn't have access before when they roll it out to the public. But what they do is they roll it out to the general public, but they want to reward people that are working on open source and are some of these top maintainers. They work on projects that are very popular, widely used. And so they come up with this kind of formula based on various project characteristics, and they basically just draw a line, right? And they say, we're going to rank everybody on these dimensions, and we're going to draw a line. Those above that line get free access, and those below that line don't get free access. And so think of this more as like a nudge experiment, because those below the line, they can get access to Copilot in other ways, but they don't get it for free through this program. And so the argument, of course, in sort of a regression discontinuity type of design is going to be that those people just above the threshold are very similar to those just below the threshold, except that some get the free access and some don't. And so, of course, the concern is always that people can game the system and play, and tweak themselves to get just over. This was on a message board related to this. And this person is saying, Copilot is available for free right now to verify students, and we also drop students out of this. We do some robustness check stuff with them later. And popular open source projects. But what a popular open source project is sadly not expressly stated, right? And so the public doesn't know how this ranking works, and so that's good for us because it means they basically can't game the system to try and get just over the threshold. And so we can use this in a fairly causal way to think about identification. So we're going to use a fairly straightforward regression discontinuity, look at the people that are just over, compare them to the people just under, and see what happens afterwards. And so we'll be looking at this as a function of kind of task allocation. So we'll be doing essentially a proportion of all of the things that you do in open source land. What percentage of those are core work? What percentage of those are project management? And again, there's this third bucket of other that we sort of use as a control group. And we'll see, and then we'll use this kind of shift in allocation of share. We've tried to do some things with time, but it turns out to be quite tricky to think about how long does it take you to write one line of code or fix one bug, because there's a huge amount of variance. And so we've been playing with a few things on that. But for the moment, we're just using this percentage of your tasks that are allocated to one type of task versus another. Again, we have about 200,000 maintainers in the whole set, but when we winnow into this, right above and right below the threshold, and they run this kind of thing once a week, they see who's above the threshold and who's below the threshold. So we end up with about 7,000 maintainers and 270,000 observations. Those are person-week observations over the course of the 2 years. So just in the first stage, we can think about indeed, we do see that the people that are lower here is better, you're higher up on the ranking. Those people are going to end up they're the ones eligible for free access, and they're going to end up using it more than those that are below the threshold. Again, it's not as clean as we would like it to be. It's not 0-1, but it's, these people are nudged into being more likely to use it. And so when we look at them on the dimension of the first hypothesis, we do indeed see this substantial increase, about 12%, in their coding as a total allocation of all their tasks, and a substantial decrease in project management on the order of about 25%. And this effect, is strongest. These are over time, over the course of the 2 years. It, goes up substantially in the beginning, but even after it levels out after about a year, it's still substantially different than the baseline. There are standard errors here. You probably can't see them because they're quite tight. And same thing with the project management decrease. Very big in the beginning, so it comes back closer to baseline, but still much lower than the baseline as time goes on. For hypothesis 2, again, when we think about autonomous work and collaborative work, big increase in autonomous work, massive decrease in collaborative work, especially in project management. We can think about, I don't think I have time to go into exactly the details, but these are the various aspects of coding, and they're all, shifting down. Sorry, these are the collaborative aspects for, sorry, let me back up. These are the number of collaborators that you're working with, and so the number of people you're working with is also going down. So you're doing fewer collaborative tasks, and on average, the things that you're doing are with fewer people, which are different, so slightly different, but it's very related. And then same thing for project management. Most of the stuff that you're going to be doing it with fewer and fewer people. Third, when we think about experimentation, we see people massively increase their work on projects that are new to them, not necessarily new to the world, and a small drop in their work on projects that they've worked on before. And I'll skip this, but we do some back-of-the-envelope calculations and show that people also start experimenting with new programming languages that they've never worked on before, and those programming languages are higher paying in the labor market as well. And then lastly, thinking about the ability things, we see on many ways of measuring ability for both coding, the lower ability people increase coding more and decrease project management more as well. And then the last thing is that, again, this is an open source land, but we try to identify who's working on this on behalf of their company, and they're going to be acting more like somebody within a firm versus not. And the results are fairly consistent across these, slight differences across the two groups, but very much similar in direction and very close in magnitude. So this isn't just a story about open source. We argue it's also a story about what's happening inside firms too. Whole bunch of robustness checks, don't have time for that. And so, there we go. Feel free to talk about that later. But we try to dig into these notions of how Gen AI changes the nature of work itself, not just productivity, and find a bunch of results. So there we go. All right, great. Thank you. Great. Shout.
I got this. You just go ahead and shout.
There we go. Go on. Yes.
Okay, great. Hi. Thank you for your presentation. Really great. I can't tell you how familiar I am with this problem, as Daniel can attest to. So my question to you is, when you were looking at the issues, PRs, etc., I think I noticed you didn't do anything on commits, commit counts, anything like that. Am I correct on this?
So I won't go backwards, but that's one of the measures that we're using for code activity, right? So if you're familiar with GitHub pages, there's like the coding page, and everything that happens on there we call code, and then the issues page, everything on there we call project management. I had a slide on that, but I think we covered it.
Okay, that's what I'm seeing.
But yes, so basically think of it as like everything on the coding page is core work, and everything on the issues page is project management, and there's a handful of other things that happen, and that's the other bucket.
Okay, great. So then my question is, did you account for branch activity, the differences in branches, and et cetera? I just wanted to...
Yeah, so are you talking like forking or?
Well, forking is one aspect of it, but say PR to one branch that may be considered main versus dev, but they're actually both in use.
Yeah, I think I see what you're talking about. I don't think we accounted for that directly, but it is something that we can look into. But like we definitely look into forking, but the branching, it's a good question. I don't think we look deep enough into that.
Just because in open source projects you might have, say, something that you're going to merge into main.
Yes.
But it's not yet.
Yes, and we can see what gets merged back as opposed to what's actually like a split off. And
okay.
yeah, we can see that, but I don't think we've analyzed that, but we can. That's a great suggestion. Thank you.
First of all, your paper was a hit at in our reading group at the Kennedy School. So thank you.
Oh, great. All right. At the Kennedy School. Oh, good. All right. In fact, I was in DC this morning, so I'm trying to influence policy.
Awesome. I wanted to ask, so the terms project management and coding, so let's say a developer is using Cloud Code, suggests a bunch of parameters, says, go make this thing, and then presses commit. Here you would record that as coding activity. But
yes.
Semantically or whatever, I would think of that as management activity.
Yeah, so it's a fair question. Like we've gotten this question before about if with Gen AI, does coding actually go away and everything is project management? And so I think yes, we have to sort of change we have to change the way we're thinking about what is work, and that's actually part of the point. Is that if Gen AI is writing all the code, then what is the human doing, right? Like the prior talks, thinking about what is the job of a coder. It's more kind of quality management and accepting things as opposed to actually writing. I think this is time for last one.
Very interesting work. My latest PR to a major open source project got merged 2 weeks ago, so I know this very well. I have two questions. One is, after Copilot was released, actually there are many startups working on software like DocSue, which will automatically do the project management for the open source projects.
Yeah.
I think, have you guys considered whether that's actually contribute to the decrease of the project management task?
So it's a good question. I don't know the precise timeline, but my recollection is that those things didn't pop up until a little bit later. And so perhaps, when that kind of deep thing first and then kind of closer to the baseline that we see over time.
Because to me, that's a huge factor.
Well, let's talk more because I want to know when those came out.
Right.
And we can do that. I'm getting the wrap it up sign. So I know there's other questions. I'll stay right here to answer more questions, but don't want to stand between people and more caffeine, which I've had too much of already today. All right. Thank you very much.